There's two things I really want to explore, at least in your story. One is how you and your husband, so like, I'm wondering, how do you know that you're lesbian? Like how would you even be able to figure that out or explore it once you're locked, quote, locked into a mixed orientation marriage, assuming that you're just straight? I also am going to imagine that your faith journey has been interwoven into your journey of sexual discovery. So where should we take your story to kind of follow those two threads along with any other threads you want to cover?
Yeah, I think that the first place to go would be the faith journey, because like I think I said before, is like, it was just impossible for me to recognize my sexuality in the church because it wasn't helpful. It was not helpful to be gay as a faithful Mormon, and especially as a faithful married Mormon. And so, yeah, it was just, I never would have understood my sexual dysfunction or my sexuality if I would have stayed in the church. And so that came after. And so the first thing to talk about would definitely be my faith journey.
All right, so let's do it. Let's jump in.
Perfect. So after I got married and graduated from BYU, I felt a lot of pressure from the church to get pregnant. And so as soon as I was graduated, went off my birth control and very quickly got pregnant and experienced a lot of fear because I was very disabled and I could barely take care of myself, I felt like. And so the thought of having to take care of another human caused me a lot of anxiety and fear leading up to my birth experience. And at this point, I'm still very strong in the gospel. I had overcome any of the doubts that, were caused by my horrible mission experience. I didn't resolve my questions. I still had a multitude of very deep questions and would often talk to my husband about them and would talk to my husband about my issues with, the sexist covenants in the temple and all sorts of different things. And so he was becoming more aware of issues of the church. He never had been aware of those issues. And I was staying faithful, even though I had lots of questions. And then my baby was born and changed my entire life. It was just...
Look at that smile.
Yeah. It was a complete paradigm shift for me. Up until the moment of birth, I was scared to be a mom. But when I held her for the first time, it was, of course, not everyone is, blessed, for lack of a better term, to have these types of experiences. Some people need to, grow to have that attachment with their baby. But I had just this amazing experience. When I saw my baby for the first time and I held her and she was put on my chest, I had the most explosive, ecstatic, euphoric experience of my life. And I had just a complete paradigm shift all at once. She became the object of my worship. I had loved and worshiped God my entire life and made him my priority. And suddenly I knew that could no longer be, that my baby was going to be my number one priority for the rest of my life, that there was just no question that she was the most important thing in the world to me and that she was the object of my devotion from now on. And so in this experience that my parents had told me, like, you're going to understand God's love in a more intimate way, and you're going to, have more appreciation for God when you actually have kids. And that was not the experience I had. I had quite the opposite of kind of realizing how pure and how strong a parent's love was, and realizing that's not the love I've felt from God. That's not the love that is taught from the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church, I knew according to the Mormon Church, the way I felt about my daughter was wrong, that I was supposed to put God first, then my husband, and then my children. And there was nothing in the world that could convince me not to put my daughter first, not to put her above God, above my husband, above myself. And it was just, it was an epiphany. It was just, I knew that she was the most important thing in my life. And There was no going back after that, and that was really the beginning of the end of my testimony in the church. I suppressed those feelings of, I had never doubted God's existence, but in those moments I was like, I remember thinking as I was pushing my baby out of me that there is no God. There is no God. He doesn't exist. And that was so strange that in that moment that was supposed to be the most spiritual experience of my life, according to my mother, that it was the moment that I had this epiphany that he didn't exist. And of course I pushed that down because I didn't want to deal with that, and I just focused on how happy I was to be a mom and didn't tell my husband about my huge paradigm shift and the doubt that was starting to creep in. But as I already mentioned, my husband's amazing. And because I had been working on him, helping him become more of a feminist throughout our marriage, he actually brought it up to me one night after we put the baby down for bed. She was a few weeks old. And he said, Lauren, we have to find out if the church is true. We have to investigate it like we never have before, because it harms women. It oppresses them. And we can't let that happen to our daughter unless it's true.
Then we could abuse and harm the women and subjugate them all we want.
Exactly. No, but we had this idea that if the church was true, we could try our best to mitigate the negative effects of the church. We know how damaging shame culture and purity culture and the sexism was to us growing up and to me growing up, and we could try our best, if it was true, to mitigate those effects and to teach her healthy sexuality and to teach her, to have intrinsic motivation instead of rely on, what the church really pushes, the external validation and all of those things we know are not healthy. We can try to mitigate if it's true, but we're not willing to put our child through all of that harm unless we are more sure than we have ever been that it's true. And so that started us on a journey of investigation. And for the first time in my life, I looked at all of the questions I always had about the church from an objective view instead of, I know the church is true, so what's the right answer? I wasn't trying to make the facts fit my reality. I was trying to look at the facts and just discern what reality was. And that's something I had never done.
Mm-hmm.
And so my husband and I spent 6 months deep dive study into church history, into church doctrine, church publications, fact checking. We read the CES letter. We read lots of other documents, and I'm very analytical. So we had a Excel document with every issue and then what's the Mormon response and then what's the, objective, what do the facts say? And then
Occam's razor or something.
Exactly. And that's what it came down to when we had all of these issues.
Wait, is it okay? So this is always, I think, one of the most important parts of all my Mormon Stories interviews, because so many Mormons go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years never being given the information, and then if they are given the information, which almost no one is, it's contextualized in a way to where they wouldn't even know that there were problems.
Yeah.
Whether it's through inoculation or some other means. And so can you slow walk us through
for sure.
each of the main issues that you confronted? Describe what the problem was for someone who doesn't know any of this stuff and how you processed it and where you came out on it.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. And maybe I also would be interested to know what was the biggest, shelf breakers or whatever you want to call it, that were things that you were weighed heavily on your Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. So going with the shelf analogy, something that I kind of like to say about my faith journey was that I had a full shelf probably from the time I was 14 on, but I had a titanium shelf. I believed there was nothing that could break my shelf. But obviously giving birth to my daughter did. And so I had lots of moral issues. The immoral actions of Joseph Smith was a huge thing for me.
Such as?
Such as his marrying other men's wives. And really for me, what got it was the lying to his wife. His first wife, Emma, he did not tell her the truth. And that he coerced young, vulnerable women. He was in a position of power and he coerced young, vulnerable women to marry him. And that was so...
And then lied about it to Emma.
Yeah, and then lied about it to Emma.
Yeah.
And that was something I found out when I was still a believing member, and that was a hard pill to swallow. And so being able to put an objective lens over all of the things I already knew about the church that were terrible was like, it just became so obvious. It was like embarrassing almost, like it's just not true. Like Joseph Smith was just a bad man. Like and that's hard to say because I know Mormons say they don't worship Joseph Smith, but they essentially do. You know, they sing praises to him, literally sing praises to him, and revere him as, you know, the prophet of the restoration and all of those things. And he was not who he said he was. And I mean, as someone who experienced, you know, sexual assaults on my mission and since and before, and, you know, other forms of emotional abuse and coercion, it was very disheartening to me to discover that the man I loved and revered as a prophet of God did those things to women, and not just one and not just two. Like, he did it over and over. And that was just so disturbing to find out. And to go into just a little bit of more detail of how he coerced women for, you know, people who don't know. He, as a prophet of God, was able to tell people with authority, according to their beliefs, that he could give people blessings of exaltation or salvation. And he would promise women that they and their entire family would be exalted if they agreed to marry him. And if they didn't agree to marry him, an angel with a drawn sword would come and kill him. What are you supposed to say as a faithful child? Because some of these women were as young as 14. What are you supposed to say when a prophet of God says, you have to marry me or I will be killed? And if you do marry me, you and your entire family are going to be saved. Like, there is no answer but yes, I will marry you.
And oftentimes it was like, you've got 24 hours to decide. Mm-hmm. So there's that added element of pressure. Mm-hmm. And of course, the implication is, if you don't marry me, then your family probably won't be saved. Mm-hmm. So it's a threat. It looks like an opportunity, but it's a threat veiled as an opportunity.
And it's not that far away from the church's modern views of polygamy in the afterlife, mm-hmm. that we are still technically a polygamous church, whether we like to admit it or not.
132, go read it.
Yeah,
yep.
That you are going to not have the highest degree of salvation in the afterlife still if you are not okay with God's views on polygamy in the afterlife. So it's still very much ingrained into our culture. Just because Joseph Smith, the prophet, isn't asking women to do it, we still, like you were talking about your problems with the temple, we're still coerced in strong, strict ways within the church. And it's hard to erase that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, for me, another issue I had with.
Oh, are you still doing polygamy? Because there's one more thing.
Oh yeah.
Well, if a woman declined Joseph's advances and spoke openly about it, he would literally call her a slut or a harlot in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So there was the added, you know, insult and shaming if she declined and spoke up. Nancy Reagan is an example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I just can't imagine how horrible. And that's the thing. If you read their journal entries, they talk that it's like the great shame of their life and how difficult these marriages to Joseph were. And it's so heartbreaking, but also infuriating. Like, I can't stand. I've gone to the church a few times since my faith journey out of it, but when I hear the song "Praise to the Man," I get visibly, like, I feel sick. Like, it's awful. He was just not a good person, and that's a hard pill to swallow as a Mormon. And I get that might turn off a lot of people who might be Mormon who are viewing this, but it's what I found to be true.
Question: if you're shelf was titanium, I think some people would argue the way the typical apologetic is you're expecting him to be perfect. So what if he's not perfect? He can still be a prophet. What's your response to that? Why were you not able to rationalize it in that way?
Yeah. So I think the biggest reason I wasn't able to rationalize it away anymore was because the rationale I used as a believing Mormon to why his actions, which seemed like he was coercing women to sleep with him, were not that way, was, he just didn't know any better. He was trying to follow God's commandment, and he didn't want to, right? Because he loved Emma so much, he didn't want to. And then he had the threat of an angel that he was going to kill him, so he was scared. And that's why things look so bad, is because he didn't know better and he was scared and trying to follow God even though he didn't understand. And so that was the rationale that I had and how I justified his actions. But then realizing that the Lord, in, as you said, D&C 132, gave very specific instructions on how plural marriage was supposed to be practiced. And he didn't follow them. So
Joseph didn't follow them.
Joseph didn't follow them, so he knew
Part
what
of
he was
that's
doing.
because that revelation came after he had already started practicing it.
That's true.
So
He practiced it secretly.
which is its own problem.
Exactly. But the whole thing of...
In fact, people don't, the revelation, D&C 132, not only came after he had already gotten well into a dozen or more wives, he only produced it as a way to persuade and even coerce Emma into going along with it. Mm-hmm. So he didn't really feel like he needed a revelation until Emma just made a big stink about it. Yeah. After she found out, after he had hid it from her for years. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, there are very simple requirements in that revelation of what plural marriage is supposed to look like. It specifically says you need the consent of your first wife, that the woman, the plural wife you marry needs to be a virgin. And I don't remember the rest of it. I'd have to pull it up, but he married other men's wives. They were obviously not virgins.
Oh, they had to be virgins. Yeah.
And, he didn't get the consent of his wife, and, threatening her with damnation if she didn't consent, is so manipulative and so abusive. And I couldn't see that as a believing member, but now it's so clear how wrong that is, to use your power to do that to a woman you're supposed to love and protect, especially now that I understand marriage a lot more, being married, it's just unthinkable that you could do that to your spouse. Because, I would never do that to my spouse, and I would never accept such behavior from my spouse. And so it's just heartbreaking to think that he got away with that, and that Emma had to live that life. It's just so sad.
One of the things people just don't realize is that Emma was like something like the 18th or 20th wife sealed to him. Mm-hmm. So she's his first wife in civil marriage, but then secretly gets sealed to 20 other women without her knowledge and consent. Finally, she finds out, freaks out, and then he's like, okay, I'll seal you to me 20 wives in.
Yeah.
Like, how in the world is that of God?
And that's the thing. In the church's essay that they put out about the subject, they talk so much about how much Emma and Joseph loved and respected each other. And it just is so upsetting, because if you love your wife, first, you don't lie to her, you don't cheat on her. And if you have the power of God to seal yourself to her, you seal yourself to her as soon as you can, not 20 wives in. So, it's just, and that slides perfectly into the other thing I was going to say about how the church's essays really helped me in my deconstruction, because their language is so deceptive.
So the gospel topics essays.
Mm-hmm. They helped me stay faithful when I was a Mormon, when I had all these questions. They were great resources for me. But the second I became objective, I would look at the sources that they cited and realize, holy crap, they are twisting and bending the truth to make the church sound good. And it became so clearly deceptive, and I couldn't rationalize that. If it's the church of God, then they shouldn't be deceptive. And that's what the topic essays are. They are deceptive. Their language is just seeped in half-truths or misleading words. And, you know, it was very helpful for me to see that and to recognize that the church
for example,
is doing that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I just
No, you're
interrupted
good.
you. So for example, like instead of saying 14 years old, they'll say several months shy of her 15th birthday, just to
Exactly.
try and, that's just a small example of the deceptive language used to try and not admit reality. But another is they go to great lengths to say there's no evidence of sexual interaction between Joseph and his, you know, polyandrous wives or whatever. And it's like, what do you want? Like VHS tapes? Like
Yeah.
what?
There's
What
plenty-
evidence are you
plenty
looking
of
for?
evidence.
Like he swore them to secrecy. They knew the stakes were high. Like what evidence do we have of any sexual activity in the 1800s? And if we know that all prophets were having sex with all their plural wives from Brigham Young on, why wouldn't Joseph have been having sex with his plural wives? That was the whole point. The Book of Mormon says that it's to raise up a righteous seed, which means to have sex. So the fact that the essays would retreat to there's no evidence of sexual activity. Again, what do they want? Like a cybercam? Like what are they wanting?
Yeah.
Have they tested the descendants of Joseph Smith? I think that's their evidence that they're resting on, that we can't find any
Children.
DNA evidence.
But
or
I mean,
something.
I think we all know that there are lots of ways you can not have children with sex.
We know abortions were going on in Nauvoo.
There might be abortions in Nauvoo, the pull-out method. You know, women can. You know, we know that before
Women had their periods later back then. He was marrying teenagers, and the average age that women got their period at the time was 17. So they might not have been fertile when he was sleeping with them. You know, like there's so many reasons why there might not be children. And there's plenty of evidence that consummation happened in plenty of the marriages, especially, you know, 3 of them went on the record saying, yes, we slept with him, you know, in the
a bunch of them.
Yeah, in the temple lot case or whatever, they admitted, we had sex.
Sworn affidavit. Yeah. So, okay. So that's one row in your spreadsheet, Joseph Smith's polygamy and coercion. And I guess the second is the church's deception in the gospel topics essays.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in the gospel topic essays that like jumped out to you as blatant half-truths?
Oh, yeah. So the race and the priesthood essay was a huge nail in the coffin for me. It was just rife with not only like manipulative language that like technically is true, but is super deceptive, but like straight up lies. Like they say things that are simply not true. Some examples of the deceptive language might be, you know, they talked about how they just didn't know the reasons that Black people weren't given the priesthood, and they have disavowed theories. The use of the word theory, saying, because let me explain, there were the disavowed theories of why Black people couldn't enter the temple and receive temple blessings or receive the priesthood were because they had the curse of Cain, or that they were less valiant in the pre-existence, and, you know, lots of things that are just racist, you know, like those were the disavowed theories, and calling it a theory makes it seem like it wasn't taught as doctrine when it absolutely was. Multiple prophets of God taught it as doctrine, as eternal truth, and
not only was it in Mormon Doctrine, the book literally named Mormon Doctrine, but at least I think 2 first presidencies signed statements calling the Black priesthood ban doctrine. This is prior to 1960. We talk about this in Matt Harris's interview. He's a great historian that's talked a lot about that.
Yeah, I'll put that in the show
and
notes.
then, as John Larson reminded us, it's in Moses, the book of Moses, which is part of the Pearl of Great Price in Mormon scripture. The curse of Cain is actually embedded into the book of Moses. So it's not hearsay. It's not policy. It was doctrine for 150 years before the church had to roll it back or walk it back.
Exactly, yeah. And so it's extremely deceptive to call it a theory when the church knows that it was taught as doctrine. And another big one that really upset me was when they changed the ban. In the essay, they were talking about receiving that revelation and how the leaders of the church looked forward to the promise that prophets like Brigham Young had said that one day Black people would be allowed to hold the priesthood. And so they paint Brigham Young's words about Black people and the priesthood to be, he promised they would one day get it. And that's not at all what he did. When you actually look at it's also very telling when they don't cite things. They make a claim and have no source on it. But I found the source of what they were talking about. And his quote was something along the lines of, like, Black people will get the priesthood when everyone on earth has gotten the priesthood, and this and that and the other, basically saying in the millennium, in the next life. Basically, he was saying when pigs fly, Black people will get the priesthood. And so to paint it as a hopeful promise that one day they will receive these blessings is just dishonest. Those were not that's not what Brigham Young was saying. And if you read his actual quote, it's very clear. And that's why they didn't include the source by that claim. And that was something that was also really disheartening, to see all of the places where they added sources and all the places where they neglected to add sources was very telling of their intentions to deceive and to paint a picture that was not true of the church's history.
So polygamy,
Well said.
Blacks in the priesthood, gospel topics essays, any other big ones? Book of Mormon?
The Book of Mormon,
What about
the
it?
founding story.
What's wrong with the Book of Mormon?
Well, other than its racism and its lack of female representation,
people have never thought about that. Do you want to talk about that? Because that was a major shelf breaker for me.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about
there are two, other than, like Mother Eve and Mary and,
which aren't actual figures in the book.
So he names people who weren't actual characters in the book. Like they weren't there. They were mentioned, but they weren't actual characters. I believe there are three. There are three women who are named: Sariah, Abish the Lamanite, and the harlot Isabel. So those are the three.
It's Isabel, but Abish or some weird name. But three named women.
Three named women
in the whole book, and 180 named men, or
exactly. And so,
is God literally that sexist?
Exactly. And that was something that bothered me, back when I was believing. Yeah, it was so frustrating to me, the complete lack of representation and role models for women in the church. And so that was really hard. But other than that, and of course the racist teachings about, the black skin being a curse.
Lamanite dark skin.
And there's just so many other problems with the Book of Mormon, historically. As I dove into the actual source documents of the founding of the church, it became very clear that the founding story that the church paints is just not accurate. The first vision, for example, in all of the restoration videos and everything that's depicted, he has this amazing first vision and then faces all of this persecution. But the truth of the matter is, he didn't tell anyone about the first vision until years after it supposedly happened. So no, he didn't face any persecution from people saying he couldn't actually have seen a vision. So that's just not true. And so many little things like that just add up to just be overwhelmingly convincing that he just made it up.
Yeah, we just had an episode with John Larson about this, the 1832 version of the first vision. That it says he was like 15 or 16, not 14.
Yep.
He visited in the first account. It said the Lord visited him, not God and Jesus. That he had already decided that the churches weren't true, and there's just so much that doesn't line up. And then there's so much evidence that between 1832 and 1838. His beliefs change, and so then the advancing accounts of the book of the first vision sound more and more fabulous, more and more spectacular, more and more specific as time goes on, but also change according to his changing beliefs, and that challenges the credibility of the story.
Yeah, and another thing that challenges the credibility of his story is that his experience, going into the woods and praying and having a darkness come and then being freed by a light and receiving the message that none of the churches were true, that's exactly what happened to his father years before. Like, his father is documented to have that visionary experience. And so Joseph Smith was just stealing from other people to create his religion, and just adding on to it, making his own spin. And Another big thing is the church loves to say Joseph Smith had a 3rd grade education. He couldn't have written a book so complex. Like, he didn't even know how to write. And that's just so misleading as well. He, yes, technically had a 3rd grade formal education, meaning he went to school until 3rd grade, but it was very common at the time to be homeschooled, and both of his parents were educators. So he got a good education, and I believe he probably had a very high IQ, was very, very intelligent. And there's also record from his mother's journal of him telling stories about the inhabitants of the Americas before the settlers were there and all of those things. He would tell these elaborate stories about them before he ever got the plates. So how did he know about the Lamanites? How did he know about all of those things if he had yet to receive the plates? It's because he was just a very gifted storyteller. And
I was fascinated with Indian lore.
He was. And another thing, if you look at just his family life growing up, his mom was, a Presbyterian, his dad was a Universalist, and there was apparently a lot of conflict in their home about the subject of religion. And Joseph Smith, perhaps in an attempt to do good, wanted to end the conflict in his home. And so he would share these stories of visions and share these stories of, this ancient record and the golden plates before he ever had the golden plates, before he ever knew what they were. And he would share these stories and establish doctrine, and his family would believe him, and it would end the conflict. And I think this is going a lot into speculation land, but I that's what I think is his reasons that he made the church, was that it was so helpful and he was so successful in preaching to his family and solving those conflicts. And he believed he could end the conflict of religion by, whether he believed he was inspired of God or not, I don't know. But I think that he was so gifted as a storyteller that he decided, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna end all of these conflicts about religion because I know a better way.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of speculation, so we can stick back to facts from now on.
Any other big shelf items or big, in the Book of Abraham is one for some?
Oh yeah, for sure. For me, it was like, he had a surefire test to see if he was actually a translator, as he claimed to be, and he failed the test, like we know.
How so?
So the Book of Abraham was claimed by the church to be a translation that Joseph Smith did on some papyri that he had bought from Egypt. And so he supposedly translated this document, and it was the Book of Abraham, and it was canonized. And now we know, because we have people who know Egyptian, that what is on the document that we have, the remnants of the document that we have that he supposedly translated, is nothing to do with Abraham or anything in the Book of Abraham. So we know that it's not true. We know that his translation was false. So yeah, he had a test. He claimed to be a translator. There was a test. Can you translate this thing correctly? And he failed. And so that really ends a lot of his credibility, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What else? There was obviously homosexuality, and all of that was something that really, really weighed on me.
What were your thoughts on that? Why was that challenging to your faith?
Because it was just something intrinsic that I knew, especially with a brother who was openly gay, that I wasn't open myself about being gay, but he was, and I loved him, and I saw how good and kind he was, and I just knew there was nothing wrong with him. I knew that he was not an abomination. I knew that, and nothing could change that. And so to hear the rhetoric of the church about gay people was very upsetting, because it went against my personal morals. And so it was just a struggle my whole time in the church to try and reconcile that, to try and say, okay, I know the church is true. I know what the church says about gay people. How do I make this work? Because it seems so wrong, And so that was always really hard. And of course, even harder when my brother was excommunicated. It was just like a devastating blow. I
Did you tell that story?
no.
When did that happen?
It happened while I was on my mission, and he just, I got an email saying, okay, I've been excommunicated, and I just cried and cried because I thought that I had lost my brother for eternity. And I didn't realize at the time how abusive that is to punish the family members of people the church is trying to punish. Like, the church didn't like my brother's actions, and so they punished me and my siblings and my parents.
Wait, explain how you guys got punished.
So when he was excommunicated, he lost all of his church blessings, meaning he lost his endowment and he lost his opportunity to be
Baptism.
in the highest degree of heaven, which is where I was planning on being and my family was planning on being. So it meant he couldn't be in heaven with us. He might go to heaven, but it wouldn't be the same heaven, and we wouldn't be able to be a forever family anymore. And so it very much felt like I was being punished for, someone else's sin. I don't think he was sinning, but the church did, and the church, it's just such an abusive practice. It's just power. It's controlling people's lives with the fear of losing everything, because the church is everything to its members,
We've all been sold as Mormons this idea that the most beautiful doctrine in all of Mormonism is the eternal family.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that's the most terrorizing doctrine in Mormonism.
It is.
Because what it really means is everyone's going to be without their family in the afterlife.
Yeah.
If you talk to just a regular old Christian, they're like, no, everybody's together in heaven. That's just the way it is. It's only in Mormonism where if one of your children or siblings or parents steps out of line, your family's blown up in heaven and a bunch of empty chairs in the celestial kingdom without your family. And it really does terrorize and cause so much pain. And yet we're still all under this illusion that that's the most beautiful doctrine in Mormonism.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I realized, that the church preaches so much to be family-centered and to be all about the family. But it's not family promoting if it only promotes one type of family. It only promotes heteronormative, cisgendered family with lots of kids. That's it. That's the only family it promotes. And so no, it doesn't affirm families, because the definition of family is so much wider than that. And that's something that I really realized, that I thought that the family was so important, and I still believe that. And to see the church for what it really was, that it didn't actually value the family. It used the family as a fear tactic to get people to stay in line. And that was really heartbreaking to realize, because, yeah, like I've said before, I just loved the church. I loved it so much. It was my whole life. And realizing it wasn't true was the hardest thing I ever did.
So hard.
Yeah. Trying to think of other shelf items I had. Gosh, I should have brought my notes of my Excel sheet, because there were so many different things.
Can we have a copy? That'd be so nice.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
Because I really I would love to see what you said you have the apologetics kind of in, in one column.
Mm-hmm, I had an excuse, you could say, for every single issue I had. I could find some sort of justification. And
do you remember that Oaks quote where he was like, "We don't need good answers, we just need answers"?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my gosh! No,
have you heard that? He's telling that to like a group of CES directors or something, right, John?
Yep, totally.
And I think that's very true. It's like, if somebody else has worked it out, some other rational, smart person has thought of it, there is an answer. Don't tell me if it's logical or not. Mm-hmm. It just needs to be something on a website somewhere that somebody's written down who's probably smarter than me with a PhD in religion, that can, manipulate words better than I can. Mm-hmm. And you put your faith that somebody else has figured it out. So apply no critical thinking sometimes. And yes, like, you can move forward with faith. Yeah. If faith is a higher priority than logic and sound reasoning, sure, move forward with it. So I get that completely. So
yeah, absolutely. I really could find a justification for everything if I tried. And like I think I said before, Occam's razor. It was just the simplest answer was it just wasn't true. In order for it to be true, there were so many hoops that had to be jumped through, so many twisting of meanings of words and manipulating scriptures and changing historical events to match, to make it work. And yes, you can go through the mental gymnastics to do that, but Occam's razor would suggest the simplest answer is the correct one. And the simplest answer was, it was just a fabrication. I'm trying to remember something else you said triggered something I wanted to share about. Shoot.
Well, I was going to ask, is it okay if I ask a question while we're thinking of it? So what was your state of mental affairs at the time? Were you panicking? Were you feeling like the rug was ripped out? Were you feeling more joy that you were able to explore your sexuality? Or did that maybe come later? Yeah,
the sexuality exploration came later in this transitional phase of, investigating. It was just anxiety and fear. The church makes it very difficult to leave. It very.
What made you afraid to leave? Tell us.
The church uses rhetoric that paints a picture that leaving is the worst thing you could ever do. They talk about people who have left like they're this big tragic story of they lost their faith, they lost their way, they were deceived, all of these things. And so I knew how everyone I loved would talk about me once I left. If I left, I knew the words that would be used because I had heard them my entire life and I had used them to talk about other people. And that was just normal because the church was everything. And so that was really scary to think that people wouldn't think highly of me anymore. And also, I had given quite literally everything I possibly could to the church. Like I gave my health up to serve the church and to serve God. And to think that, to think that was all in vain was awful. To think I did it for nothing, that I became disabled and, ruined my life, changed all my life dreams had to change. All my goals, everything had to change. All my career goals, everything I wanted to do with my life had to change because I could no longer do most of the things I wanted to do. And that sucked to realize like that might have been in vain,
There's a sunken cost. I don't know what it's called.
Sunk cost fallacy. I was about to say that.
Yeah. On the same level, aren't we, John? Yeah. Or I feel like we often like to say that, the people who are leaving the church are some of the people who are the most motivated to stay in it because they gave up the most. And I can imagine to be devastating that you put in so much and coming to terms with the thing that you sacrificed your health and well-being and so many things could possibly not be true. That is cause for outrageous amounts of anxiety, I'm sure, depression, existential crisis all over the place, right?
Yeah, for sure. And also I was losing all my hope, that the only thing that had gotten me through, becoming disabled at such a young age was, the hope in a resurrection. And if the church wasn't true, I didn't know if I believed in that anymore. And so, I was just so sad that it might not be true and hoping so much that I would find that it was. I was going in objectively, but I was really hoping that it would be true. But yeah, the concept of maybe it not being true was sad because I wanted to be a goddess. Like, what an amazing thing that Mormons believe they get to become gods. Like, that's what I wanted. I had faced a lot of abuse and oppression, and I was ready to be powerful and to be a goddess and to rule with my husband over worlds and populate planets and all of those things. I was so enthusiastic and so excited to fulfill my purpose as a Mormon, and to think that purpose doesn't exist. It's just a fairy tale was heartbreaking. As I transitioned out of believing, it went from heartbreak to anger to heartbreak, back and forth, like I would have heartbreaking prayers where I sobbed and said, please let it be true, God. Like, that's all I've ever wanted my whole life. I want that blessing that I was promised. And then be angry of like, I'm so mad that you're not real and I did all of this for you. Like, I know that doesn't make sense to pray to a God that I didn't believe was real, but I would pray and just be mad that I was realizing he didn't exist. And
did you have any, like, a lot of people obviously deconstruct the truth claims of Mormonism, but they still believe in Jesus Christ, or they'll still pray to him. Were you still having any devotion to like a Christian deity?
Yeah, that was a really hard part for me because I just kind of became a lot of my deconstruction, which I haven't mentioned yet, was in God himself and how unfair and unkind the God we were supposed to worship was. And so realizing, like, if this God is true, I don't want to worship him because he's a genocidal maniac. Like, it became hard for me to believe in the Christian God after that. But I couldn't let go of the love that I felt for Jesus. You know, I had been so devoted to him and had done so much for him in my life that letting go of that was something that I just couldn't do. And so I still hold a very special spot in my heart for Jesus, but as a man, not as my savior. I believe that, you know, there's enough historical evidence to see that he was most likely a real person who did real things and was actually killed. And I think that a lot of his teachings were beautiful. And, you know, he was radical for his time. He taught radical acceptance, which is something that I personally believe so strongly in, that, yeah, I would say Jesus is now one of my heroes, but not one of my gods anymore. And so that was a really hard loss, though. I literally felt the same, you know, the same emotions and feelings of grief that I did when one of my friends died. Like, I literally felt that I was grieving the loss of a dear friend when I stopped believing in the church and in Jesus's divinity. And it happened right before Christmas, and that was terrible Christmas for me. Just like every Christmas song would just make me sob. And it was just a very, very difficult process to transition out of belief because I felt like I was losing so much.
So if I'm hearing you, you're saying that, because obviously the Trinitarian view and the way that a lot of Christians view things, and they get kind of upset with Mormons because we never believed in the correct Jesus in the first place, because our view of our devotion to our Heavenly Father is who we truly worship. And then we also worship Jesus Christ. I'm an ex-Mormon, but I'm never really exactly clear about how much we're supposed to worship Jesus Christ as our older brother versus giving all of our devotion to Heavenly Father. But it sounds like what you're saying is you recognized Heavenly Father as kind of like a genocidal maniac who was very unfair, who set up this system, who sacrificed his son, and that you give your love and devotion to Jesus Christ, and that you're putting more of the blame and discomfort and unfairness on your Heavenly Father and not Jesus. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
That you had no problem worshiping Jesus, but not Heavenly Father?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the hardest thing for me to let go of when I transitioned out of the church was, you know, my love and belief for Jesus. And you know, as I mentioned before, becoming a mother is what helped me start my deconstruction. And yeah, Heavenly Father became kind of a villain in my eyes, like through my deconstruction process, because I felt what a mother's love, what a parent's love should be. And the thought that my daughter Lori Beth, could do anything that would cause me to disown her or punish her in extreme ways, like, was unthinkable.
Like, cast her out of your
Forever.
presence for
Never
eternity.
see her again.
Like, I when you talked about this early in the episode, I thought that is one of the most powerful. Like, I've heard 40,000 exit narratives by now, and that's not an exaggeration. And it's always like Book of Abraham, peepstone in a hat, polygamy. I am just now wondering, why is giving childbirth not top 5 or becoming a parent, not top 5 or top 10 cause for Mormon faith crises, because that's so profound. You just have to have a kid and think about what it means to be a good parent, to realize that Mormon God Mormon God doesn't qualify on the even base level of being a healthy, loving parent.
Exactly. That was really the biggest thing for me, was just recognizing that, not only is it unthinkable, like I literally would rather die a horrible death than ever choose to be separated from my daughter. Like there is nothing in the world. Like she could murder someone and go to jail and I would visit her every week. And that's not an exaggeration. Like I created her, my body created her. And there's this narrative in the church that we owe God everything because he gave us life. And when I became a parent, I realized how messed up that is. My daughter doesn't owe me anything. She didn't ask to be created. I chose to create her. I chose to give birth to her. I chose to get pregnant. I owe her everything. I owe it to her to be the best parent I can, to make sure she has every chance to be successful and happy in this life. And that's something the Mormon God doesn't give. He doesn't give that chance to his children. He doesn't parent in kind, loving ways. He is an authoritarian parent, which we know is unhealthy. We know the social sciences tell us that authoritarian style parenting is damaging and harmful, and that's the way he chooses to parent. An all-knowing God chooses to parent that way. And I, just the more I learned about parenting, I love to study, I love to read. My husband actually got his degree in family studies at BYU, so he knew all the right studies, all the right books to read when it came to parenting. So we were very, very well-informed parents when we had kids, or when we had one kid, our child. So we knew what it meant to be a good parent, and we knew what it meant to be a bad parent. And it just was it became very obvious once I felt that parental love that God was not a good parent.
I love that so much.
That's so interesting because I'm sure BYU, who's obviously been in the news this week for a lot of reasons, there's so many things at BYU where who's that has that saying, the Frankenstein? Is that John Larson has that saying that if you put together every professor at BYU, you get like an atheist or something because each one in their own department like supersedes the knowledge.
In other disciplines, they're atheist. Yeah.
So
but in their own discipline, they're a believer.
Yeah. Like, right? So like the marriage and family and people who know the social sciences on what makes a good parent, that they can literally like deconvert people on their faith in Heavenly Father by teaching what a good parent would be, while people are then audibly like, oh wait,
no, I'm sorry. They're an atheist in their discipline.
Yeah.
And
I think
a believer
people know
in all the other disciplines. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That if you
so
put them all together.
A geologist knows that the age of the earth is billions of years old. The evolutionary scientist knows that evolution's true, but then in all the other disciplines.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I didn't want to misquote John Larson.
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting that like, you can be a faithful, devout Mormon, and studying what you hope for your children can literally deconvert you. I think that's such an interesting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Just the longer I was a parent and the more experience I got, like I mentioned, I was studying for like 6 months, so my baby was still very young, but it just became more and more clear, more things I would read. It was like, I could never do that as a parent. I would never say that to my child, when I would read the scriptures or revelations by prophets. And that was another huge thing. Part of my deconstruction was, what is the point of a prophet if not to talk to God and get the answers to these big questions? Like, we have these hard things like the blacks in the priesthood essay when they say we just don't know why Black people were denied those blessings. Well, you're a prophet of God. Ask a God. Like, what's the point of existing as a prophet if you're not going to ask these hard questions, if you're not going to request revelation from God on these hard topics that are not only causing faith crisis, but are hurting people. Like, people in the church are hurting. People of color are hurting. Gay people are hurting. Trans people are hurting. Women are hurting. Men are hurting too because, the church oppresses their sexuality and their expression as well. And so it's like so many people in the church are hurting. And God could end that hurt by answering some of our questions. And he either chooses not to, or the prophets can't really ask him because they're not really prophets.
It's even worse. He not only could end it, he could have prevented it.
Yeah.
By having revelations in the Book of Mormon that talk about gender identity and expression and sexuality, sexual identity and expression and race and critical race theory or whatever, pick your social ill, civil rights movement, slavery, women's suffrage.
Yeah.
Like he could have just said in the Book of Mormon, Joseph's founding scripture, okay, women need to vote. We need to stop having slaves. You don't choose to be gay. Trans people exist. Here's what you do about it. Now that would have been scripture, right? That would have been revelation, right?
Exactly. And a huge
Here's the age of
thing-
the earth. Evolution's true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And something that I'll go on the apologist route that a lot of people, and I even believed, that we don't have all the answers because we need to have faith and we need to have hard experiences and grow and learn from those hard experiences because our purpose is to become like God. And so that requires a lot of refining and a lot of suffering and a lot of those things. And that's the position of the church on why those things happen. And, if you phrase it like that, maybe it sounds good, but I just began to realize how ridiculous and nonsensical that is, that, I don't need to suffer to be a good person, I'm not going to make sure my child suffers so that she can become a good person. I'm going to try and teach her to be a good person through kind, loving, gentle ways. She doesn't need to suffer to be good. And it's just so ridiculous that people accept that answer that we need to suffer. And on top of that, we need to have faith. Why? What does that give us? If our purpose is to become God and God is all knowing and faith is believing in things we don't know, like we can't see, then why do we need to have that skill to become a God? It doesn't make any sense because when I'm a God, I'm going to know everything, so I don't need to have faith. And so why can't God just tell us? Why can't God just answer our prayers a little more clearly? If he was really concerned with our growth and our well-being, he would give us these answers, just like I'm going to give my daughter answers when she has hard questions. Because to me, it seems like God is more concerned with devotion than our well-being. If the Mormon God is true, he's more concerned that we blindly obey him no matter what than actually helping us become good people by answering our hard questions and showing us how to be empathetic. And all of these things just became so clear to me the more I learned about parenthood.
I'm thinking of a Mr. Deedy episode or a TikTok episode potentially, but what you're saying is so profound. You can imagine sort of God with his architects in heaven before the founding of the world. It's like, okay, we're going to create this mortal probation as a test. We're going to have these spirit children now. We're going to create this mortal probation as a test, and we're going to send them all down and test them. And it's like, okay, well, what are we going to test them on, Heavenly Father? Should we test them on how charitable they are? That's not the big one. Okay, should we test them on overcoming really big obstacles like natural disasters or calamities or preventing war or fighting disease or promoting literacy? How are we going to grade them? And it's here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to make it so no one remembers me. I'm going to make it so there's no evidence that I exist. And the big test will be, can they still believe in me when there's no reason to believe in me? And that's going to be the defining characteristic of their mortal probation to decide whether they get to live with me forever. Like any parent who did that, you send your kids to what's that?
I'm going to do lots of miracles. And then as soon as they invent video cameras, I'm out. I'm just not going to do them anymore. It's not fair.
No, but imagine a parent that sends their kid to a foster care and erases any evidence that they ever existed. And their test is, can you find me as a parent now that I've destroyed all the evidence?
Exactly.
Spend the rest of your life trying to find me.
That parent would be a monster.
What parent would do that? A monster, right?
Exactly. And that's what I realized. I applied what God does to what if a parent on earth did that, and realized that's terrible.
It's messed up.
It's abusive. It's controlling. It's manipulative. It's not a God I want to follow, and it was.
And going back to talking about your mission and how much you basically abused yourself for the church, for your devotion to God, and how that is glorified, yeah, all of this, believing things on bad evidence is glorified, doing a lot of things. And if you would act the same way to somebody who's in an abusive relationship with you, if you were like, well, I'm in the refiner's fire, that's a glorified thing in the church, that like Christ refines you, God refines you for his purposes, for his higher law that he's preparing you for, and you sacrifice yourself. And that's kind of cool sometimes. I think that's a beautiful part of the religious experience, is doing hard things until you are debilitated in some way, or until X, Y, and Z, or until you, subjugate yourself and subjugate others or marginalize others. Like, yeah, there's small pieces of truth within religion that I think are beautiful like that, Absolutely. But then when it's exaggerated and you're not able to differentiate when it's healthy for you and for society anymore, it's very, very destructive. As I think like that difference.
Well, just that idea, I hate you for your own good. I'm going to punish you, inflict pain upon you to help build your character. That's definitionally abusive, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just so astounding to me that it wasn't obvious before, you know, but at the same time, I know it couldn't have been. That's how I was raised. That was the world I grew up in. That was the paradigm I had. And like I mentioned before, I had a lot of really difficult things happen to me in my adolescence. And that was how I self-medicated. That was how I stayed afloat, was like throwing myself into the gospel. And so I have to remind myself to have grace for myself for not realizing sooner, that, it's really hard. It's hard to realize when it's your whole life. It's hard to realize when it's your support system. It's, your social system. It's your everything, the church isn't just a religion. It's absolutely a culture to be Mormon.
And I'm going to circle back to something we've already kind of said, but when Carah mentioned the sunk cost fallacy, we all know that if you're 60 or 70, it's a lot harder to leave the church than if you're 20. Because you have to admit that 40 or 50 years, 60, 70 years of your life were spent built on a lie, basically. I have to imagine, and this is kind of a sensitive thing, you now facing a disability, potentially a lifelong disability, it has to have crossed your mind a lot, if not every day. If I hadn't have believed in this church, if I hadn't gone on that mission, maybe I wouldn't be disabled.
Yeah. Honestly, that's something that was one of the hardest parts about leaving was just wishing so badly that I could have either found out sooner that it wasn't true, or, not even that, because to me it's just like, I just don't think that was possible. I don't think I could have recognized it was true, because I was so convinced it was, and so devout, that I think something like childbirth was the only thing that could have gotten me to see the truth. But I certainly wish that I would have advocated for myself. I would have either not gone on a mission or demanded to go home when I was struggling to walk. Like, I should have, when I called my mission president and told him how sick I was and he didn't call an ambulance for me, I should have told him, don't be stupid. I'm dying over here. Get me to the doctor, that's definitely something that most days I try not to think about, but some days I'm just like, gosh, I wish I could go back. I wish I could go back and change that, because, my life would be a lot better if I didn't have this illness. And I just can't think that way too often. Sometimes I let myself think that way and let myself feel sad, but then I have to pick myself up and remind myself I still have a lot to be grateful for.
So considering that you, sounds like, do not believe in the church whatsoever, is there any, for people who are committed themselves to going on a mission because they still believe in the church, or they're sending their kids on missions because they still believe in their church, do you have some advice for people
Absolutely.
who are still potentially wanting to go on a mission?
Yeah, I actually tell this to all my friends who serve a mission, is that you have to advocate for yourself, because your leaders will not do that for you. That as much as you believe in the church and want to serve God, great. Go and do what you want to do for your life. You are the master of your life, but do not put yourself in unsafe situations. Do not, let people neglect you. Like, if you're sick, stay home. If you need to go to the doctor, demand to go to the doctor until they let you. Like, it's just, I know that's hard to say, but honestly, I wish someone would have said that to me, because I thought it would be disobedient to do that. And that was a huge thing I said to God when I still believed in him, when I would beg him to heal me and beg him to make good on his promises of healing, was I could be such a better servant if I wasn't disabled. All I want to do is serve you. I want to serve you for the rest of my life. Heal me so I can do it better, so I can do it more thoroughly. And, so if you believe in God, then the God you believe in wants you to serve him your whole life. So don't do something that's going to prevent you from being able to serve, advocate for your health, advocate for your safety, because, God shouldn't want you to put yourself in those dangerous situations. So that's what I typically tell people, is just be an advocate for yourself.
I like that, because it sounds like your framing of the God that you worshiped when you were on a mission was a God that you needed to sacrifice, down to your very life to serve, if that's what he asks of you, down to what you said, like about how you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to repent and get on my knees. And the only thing I need to repent for is having like ill will against my mission president, right? Sounds like you had that certain view of God. And it doesn't mean that a Mormon who's serving a mission, it sounds like you're saying, needs to deconstruct their entire belief in God, but at least reframing it that God would not ask you to hurt yourself. Like God would want you to advocate for yourself. Yeah. So if you're going to serve a mission for the church, believe in the best faith interpretation of a loving God, at least.
Exactly. Yeah. I thought that I believed in a loving God, but I absolutely believed that God wanted me to sacrifice. God wanted me to show my devotion, prove my devotion, which, when you think about it, doesn't make sense. If he can see my heart, he doesn't need me to become disabled to show him that I love him. He hopefully wants me to have a good experience in life and wants me to be healthy and thrive. So yeah, just to focus on the loving aspect of God, because I think most Mormons believe God is loving. I didn't recognize how unloving the Mormon God was until I started to deconstruct. I think a lot of the harmful things that the Mormon God has done is framed in a way for believers that it was ultimately loving in the end. He denies gay people rights because he loves them and he doesn't want them to be committed to a marriage for their entire lives that won't continue in the next life. And so it's framed, instead of, bigotry, it's framed to be love. He loves them so much that he will correct them. And so I think that most Mormons do believe that God is loving and can't see that a loving God wouldn't do most of the stuff that the Mormon Church says that God did.
Yeah, well said. Right on.
So anything else you want to say about your faith journey? I mean, I guess it's worth saying that you haven't technically come out yet as having lost your faith publicly. So this interview is the first time many or most people or anyone is really going to hear this, other than your husband and whoever else you've privately come out to.
I've privately told my family and a few select friends. But yeah, I, for a long time, was afraid to come out as ex-Mormon because, like I said, I didn't want people to say those nasty things about me losing my faith or being deceived, because I just don't believe that they're true. I don't see it as me losing anything. I left because I gained something. I gained more knowledge about the church. I gained more insight.
The opposite of being deceived.
Exactly.
You were informed.
I was informed.
You got informed, not deceived.
And that's the one thing that's unfortunate about this interview, that I can't go into every last detail of all the sources I read and everything I learned, because, like I said, once I saw all of the evidence, it was embarrassingly obvious that the church wasn't true. And heartbreakingly so, I was heartbroken that it wasn't, but I think that's why so many people say things like that you were deceived, because they don't see it all at once. They might see one problem at a time, and that's how I was when I was in the church. I would tackle one problem at a time. I would tackle blacks in the priesthood, and I would study and study and study and come to some sort of justification and feel a little bit more at peace, and then I would tackle the next problem. But when you look at them all at once, all in one spot, there's no denying that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a fabrication by Joseph Smith, that it is not run by God. And if it is, that God is not one that should be followed because he's awful.
If you get, which probably will come, a criticism that you were looking for bad faith interpretations of Joseph's actions and trying to fit the CES letter and all of the things, the anti-Mormon literature, quote unquote, try to fit that into a paradigm that made sense for you because you realized were technically not attracted to men and wanted to find a way out of the church. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I mean, my response would be that I didn't realize I was gay until I had been out of the church for like 6 to 9 months. I don't remember how long. It was a significant amount of time after. So I had no ulterior motive. You know, I truly, truly, truly wanted to do that research and find that the church was true because of all the reasons I already said. You know, it was my everything. I had given so much to it, but that's just not what I found when I did the research. And yeah, I think that people are going to think that. People are going to say, I wanted it to not be true, and they would be wrong. And I can't change their mind on that because that's what they have to believe. They need to believe that in order to feel good about their discipleship because, you know, so many people do things that they otherwise wouldn't, do unkind, uncaring things that they otherwise wouldn't because of the church. They reject their gay children or their gay friends. They probably wouldn't do that if it weren't for the church, but they do. And so they have to justify somehow their belief in this church that has, you know, historically and currently oppressed many groups of people. They have to believe that it's true so that they can be happy and feel good about themselves. But, you know, they don't realize that their happiness is, I don't want to say false because I don't know, but I know my happiness was not true happiness. I truly believed I was happy, but it was because the church...
You almost died.
Exactly.
You came really close to death.
The church told me what happiness was. Happiness was obedience. Yeah. I was obedient. Therefore, whatever I was feeling had to be happy. And so, you know, I wished after I was disabled and got home from my mission and my life was very difficult, I honestly just wished to die because then I would not be sick anymore. I would not suffer. I just felt so terrible all the time. And I just wanted it to end. I just wanted to go into that peace of the afterlife. I wanted to be resurrected. I wanted to have that perfect body. And so I was having all of this, not necessarily like suicidal thoughts, but I mean, I wanted to die and I thought I was happy. And it's just so insane to me that I thought I was happy in that time where I literally wished for death almost every day. And it was because I was looking forward to death with hope. You know, I was saying, I can't wait to experience all these wonderful things I have for me in the afterlife. And it just really stifled my happiness and in a way where I didn't realize that it was stifling my happiness. And so a lot of people think there is no happiness outside the church because that's what they're told. They're told there is only joy within the church. You can have momentary pleasure outside of the church, but there's only joy to be found in the restored church. And that is simply not the case.
If you're wishing for death,
yeah, then you're probably not happy. And I have found, especially since discovering my sexuality and really settling into my post-Mormon life, I have found more joy than I ever thought was possible. And the thought that so many people are suffering and think that their suffering is necessary and will live entire lives of hardship and heartache and suffering because they think that's what God wants is just heartbreaking. And I just... You know, I'm very outspoken on certain platforms about the church because of that, because I just desperately want my friends and family to be happy. And I have experienced joy on levels that I could never have imagined since leaving the church. And it's not a momentary thing. Before it was, I would suffer, and then I would have a beautiful spiritual experience and I would be reminded that God loved me and that Jesus was real. And I would feel that euphoric feeling. And then I would go back to suffering. And so I thought I was happy because I had all those moments of joy, but my joy rarely isn't there now. I am just so happy all of the time. And it sucked getting there. Like the deconstruction process was so hard, but now that it's over, mostly over, I'm probably still deconstructing things, but yeah, I just wish people would know that there is so much joy, so much happiness to be found outside of the church, that the church doesn't have a monopoly on joy.
So beautiful. That was so powerful. So much important stuff to learn and to contemplate from that. And I've heard, tens of thousands of these stories. So thank you. My last big question is, what do you do when you realize you identify as a lesbian, that you are attracted to women, but you're in a marriage with a husband that you love and adore, and with a kid that you want to raise with the husband and want to support? How in the world do you go about navigating that, knowing that maybe some of your core, how do you discover what your core needs are, your core desires are, and then what do you do? How do you even contemplate continuing in a marriage when you know that's a big part of you that's either a big question mark or that's leaving you on a weekly or daily basis unsatisfied or unfulfilled? Tell us that, take us through that part of the story, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to set that up, I think what's important to talk about is kind of the journey our marriage took as we left the church. As I said, it was very, very difficult to leave the church. And we discovered that outside of the, we were told by the church what our worldview was supposed to be. And so we had our worldview in common. And when we left the church, we discovered our worldviews were very different. And that caused a lot of conflict. And we really struggled for a few months. And we even considered divorce. And ultimately, thankfully, we worked through those problems. We went to therapy. We recommitted ourselves to each other. And that was the context of me discovering my sexuality, was, the strongest point of my marriage, where we were so committed to each other, so in love, had really worked really hard on our marriage. It was really, really hard, but we worked through those problems. And so when I did discover, I'm getting ahead. Let me explain how I discovered. I was with my husband, and I had, obviously recognized before we married that there was some issues where I wasn't feeling as attracted to him as I thought I should be. But I buried that because I was like, but I love him and it doesn't matter. And attraction can grow, and I like who he is. And how vain of me to I thought I was just being vain, that he needs to be a perfect 10, or I was like sad at myself for thinking that way and not realizing that it was something deeper. And so a few months ago, I started to kind of realize, no, I'm just not attracted to my husband, And at that point, I hadn't realized that I was attracted to women. I mean, I had, but I had chalked it up to the over-sexualization of women in the media, that, women are attractive, or women turn me on because of media being awful and over-sexualizing women. So I started having these feelings of, oh my gosh, I'm realizing I'm not attracted to my husband. This could be a really, really big problem. And I was really scared, and I didn't want to tell my husband that, because how would that feel to have your wife tell you, sorry, dear, I'm not attracted to you. And so I didn't feel like I could tell anyone. And so it was a few days of, turmoil before one night I was up really late thinking, and decided that I was going to look up some, not pornography, but
erotica,
more explicit media choices, and just listen to my feelings. And because I was starting to get this inkling of, maybe I'm attracted to women. And when I didn't push those feelings down. And it was like literally just on TikTok. So obviously nothing too bad. But like I just said, okay, is this something that I am attracted to? And it was just very obvious when I actually could ask myself that question honestly and not be afraid of, eternal ramifications, that I could realize, I'm attracted to women. And I very immediately, told my husband. I was in bed already and he came in bed and I said, I need to tell you something. And I told him, and I had no apprehension because we had such, we were at such a good point in our marriage that I knew I could trust him. And I hadn't even fully realized my sexuality yet. So I just turned to him and I said, I think I'm bisexual. And he's like, okay, like, let's talk about that. And so he asked me lots of questions and kind of dived into how I felt about male bodies and female bodies and my sexual experiences. And he asked all the right questions, because of his major, he kind of knew what questions to ask. And after he asked all those questions, he's like, Lauren, you're not bisexual, you're gay. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think you're right. And then I wept, but it was tears of joy. I was so relieved that there was an answer, that it's not that there was something wrong with my sexuality or wrong with my body, that I was just gay. And that was such a relief. I couldn't sleep all night. I kept waking up my husband and talking about how excited I was that I finally had an answer to all of these questions, that I no longer felt broken. I just felt like myself. Like I felt like, yes, I'm gay. That's who I am. And honestly, the thought of divorce or separation wasn't even a question for us. We had already had that discussion. A few months before we had the discussion, should we stay together or should we get divorced? And we had come to the conclusion we should stay together. So we didn't feel the need to have that discussion again. But it was such a relief that we got to decide what that meant for our marriage, that we weren't going to be told by a church or by a God what our marriage needed to look like. And that was huge, because if I would have made that realization as a Mormon, then it would have been terribly difficult, because I would have had to live a life of suppression. I had already lived a life of suppression, of suppressing that part of me, and the thought that I would have to do that for the rest of my life, that was terrible. Like that would have been terrible. And so to be free to say, we get to decide what our marriage looks like, and a religion isn't going to tell us anymore, and there's just so much restriction on what a marriage is supposed to be in Mormonism. You can't even think about someone other than your spouse, or it's a sin. And that frankly just was not possible for me. I could not enjoy my sexual experiences with my husband if I wasn't fantasizing about women, which should have been a clue to me that I was gay a lot sooner, but it wasn't.
That's what you were doing earlier on?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which I don't think I mentioned before, that like I had trouble, feeling pleasure or even orgasming until 6 months into my marriage, when I finally gave in to the urge to fantasize about women instead. And I was still in denial. And that wasn't even with like sex, like that was still a painful experience, that it was just like in other activities that I would do with my husband, that I would be able to have pleasure, but it would only be when I would think about women. And I somehow did not realize back then. You would have thought that would have been a pretty big clue, but it wasn't.
Serious compartmentalizing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So because the Mormon definition of marriage is like no fantasizing about someone else, no masturbating, no watching porn, no watching any inappropriate media, no flirting with other people, no sex with other people, like all of those things are very, very strictly defined, and sexual sin is considered next to murder. And so it was very serious business. You can't break those rules when you're a Mormon. And so to have the freedom to say, our marriage is going to look like whatever we want it to look like. If we want to open our marriage to other people, we're going to do that, because we get to decide. I'm not saying that we necessarily, that's inevitable, that we will do that, but the fact that I have that option, that there are avenues that I can take to be in the marriage I want to be in and be sexually fulfilled. Like, what a relief, I don't have to be afraid that I'm going to be in this marriage that's going to repress me for the rest of my life. I can know that I have options, that no matter what we decide, we're going to decide something that will work for both of us, whether that is media choices or opening the relationship or a million other things, like we can make it work for us if that's what we want, and it is what we want. We want to make it work.
And you said working for both of you, and while I am highly impressed with how you have been able to work through these issues continually, sounds like from the very beginning of your marriage. And I've just been thinking about your sweet husband who we went out to lunch with, who's been here taking care of your daughter. And what has it been like for him, and to recognize that it wasn't that he couldn't turn you on, first of all, that this is something that is just a sexual orientation that's innate within you. So what is it, his deconstruction of the marriage, like you mentioned, how has that helped his psyche?
Oh yeah. Yes, there were some hard aspects of it, but for the most part, it's been also a great relief for him, because obviously it's hard that, his wife isn't sexually attracted to him. Like, of course that's going to be difficult, but he doesn't take it personally. And he now has, like you said, that relief of knowing it's not him. Like, he's not the problem. I'm just gay. And that's such a relief. And not only that I'm a lesbian and I'm choosing to be with him. Like, I fell in love with him. That is awesome. Like, I feel like that's every guy's dream, to have a lesbian fall in love with him, like
that speaks worlds to his character, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. He's just amazing. And yeah, it's been really good for him, and it's been really fun for our marriage. I feel like we have more in common than most heterosexual marriages. We both love women. And, I know I shared this before, but we went to the beach and we could both be like, check out the girl in the red swimsuit, and be like, nice, she's cute. Like, that's just fun for us now, instead of me feeling guilty that I noticed, or pushing that down, and him feeling guilty that he noticed. It's so ridiculous that in Mormonism, you're expected to turn off your basic hormones in your body and not notice other people, that's a sin, that if you even look at another woman, if you're, a man and you're married, then that's a sin in Mormonism. But to be like, you have eyes. Like, I know my husband has eyes, and that he has hormones, and that he has a sex drive. And so it doesn't offend me if he notices a beautiful woman, just like it doesn't offend him that I notice a beautiful woman. And it's just taken out all of the jealousy of our marriage, because before, I really struggled with jealousy. I would, if I thought, or if I saw him looking at a woman, that he in that way, I would get very upset and come to realize it was because I wanted to look at women that way and I didn't feel like I could. And so
jealous wives, maybe you're gay. No, just kidding.
Yeah, but it was just such a relief to be like, yeah, I get to check out women. My husband gets to check out women. We get to discuss it together. We get to have fun together, and it's just only benefited our marriage. Our marriage has only gotten better since my discovery of my sexuality. And that's something that is something else I want to put out, because I know that mixed orientation marriages normally are not the best option, but I want it to be clear that I am with my husband because that is what we both want, that we are both very happy in our marriage. And even though, yes, there is stigma, rightly so, stigma around mixed orientation marriages, that ultimately I just want people to respect my decision to be with my husband, because I know a lot of people might think I'm not being true to myself being with a man as a lesbian, but I am. I am being true to myself because I want to be with him, because I love him. And so I am following what I want. And ultimately, it's just really made me realize that marriage is not such like a strict thing. It shouldn't be in a box, and that ultimately you get to decide. You get to decide what your life's going to look like. And I never got to do that as a Mormon because my life was laid out for me, exactly what I needed to do, exactly who I needed to be, and being able to discover who I am and what I want my life to be has been such an amazing and fun experience.
Beautifully said. Yeah. John, you're going to say something?
So, obviously, because I did my research on this topic, I'm having a flood of memories and of feelings. I always used to say that, of course, people can choose to enter into a mixed orientation marriage, but I always like to say that it should have just like a cigarette box, it should have a big red warning label saying, warning, mixed orientation marriages have been found on average to be very hazardous for your health and for the health of your loved ones and have a very super high failure rate. And so like there's that coming into my brain. I'm also mindful of, I interviewed Josh and Lolly Weed. So you guys were probably still in diapers when Josh and Lolly Weed came out in, let's just say 2006, 2007 as a very public Mormon mixed orientation marriage. And for many, many years, they were paraded around as like the example of you can do it, and then of course just a few years later, Josh comes out as gay and leaves Lolly, and now he's dating men, and that marriage failed, and I think we're somewhat happy for them that happened.
Just not happy for the kids that they created under the guise that they can make it work. That's the problem. I really think is the crux of it, is the lie that the church sells that it will work. And then there are, these children that are left as the collateral damage of that. When
in Josh and Lolly's case, I think they're still best friends. I think they still co-parent,
That's good.
I don't know. They don't talk to me, but probably in part because I was critical of the harm I felt like their very public example was potentially causing to encourage other people to enter into mixed orientation marriages, even though I think they were careful to not say, don't use this as an example. When you go public and when you allow yourself to become a public figure,
get articles written about you from the church.
Then that's what's going to happen. But anyway, I get a sense that they're still besties and that their kids are probably fine. Who knows?
Again, systems always. They did the best within the system that they felt like they had to. But yeah.
And then the final thing that comes to mind, you just reminded me of one of my favorite Mormon Stories interviews of all time that I haven't thought of in so many years. I interviewed this man named Eldon Karchner. I actually went down to Colorado and I filmed him and his family. Basically, Eldon was gay, grew up in Arizona in a super conservative Mormon family, and knew he was gay, went to BYU, became was a young ambassador, but did the conversion therapy thing and married a woman because he was promised that he should, and her name was Heather. And even though he was gay and she was straight, they were best friends and just loved each other. And she accepted him and they made it work, and they had beautiful kids and they loved their kids. And then she died of cancer. And it's a classic Mormon Stories episode. But I just remember watching it and feeling really fraught because I'm like, on the one hand, I want everyone to run away screaming from a mixed orientation marriage. And here there's a couple, or at least the gay man in a couple, just like now you, saying, hey, it works for us. And but that is the human predicament, or that is the human condition, is that everyone's got to find their way. And none of us needs to even feel the responsibility of standing in judgment over someone else's decision. We just need to have all the information, know the data, know the risks, and then make an informed decision. And what I love is that you weren't doing it under religious duress, and that's the thing. Almost no one would enter into a mixed orientation marriage without religious duress. And who knows, maybe you would not have married your husband if you had been able to explore your sexuality previously. And fell in love with a woman, and maybe you would have made other choices, but it doesn't matter. That's where you are now. Mormon Stories isn't so much advocating for anything, in or out of the church, in or out of whatever type of marriage. What we are advocating for is full information, kind of an evidence-based life, best information you can have, and then in fully informed consent. when you're making your decisions. And Carah's nodding. So I think I said something right.
Yes. What else did you want to say to that, Lauren? I was going to ask a follow-up question, but.
Yeah, no, I honestly, because I know the research around mixed orientation marriages, because of my husband and his degree, I was honestly very hesitant in coming forward with my story about my sexuality. I really had to weigh, like, is it important enough to me that I share my truth when people could take my story in the wrong way and make bad decisions for their life,
or just
I had
judge you.
Oh yeah, or judge me. And I had to weigh that. To me, discovering my sexuality came with learning so many things about sexuality that for me wasn't common knowledge. And if I would have known the differences between, sexual and romantic attraction and all sorts of different things, if I would have known those things, I would have gone through a lot less pain in my life. And so even though I was nervous that people might take it the wrong way, if I seem like I'm promoting mixed orientation marriage, I rationalized that the other information, the other side, is also really important to get out, that people need to know, first, it's not normal to have pain during sex. If you do, go to a doctor, like a qualified doctor, and get that figured out, and, really listen to your feelings, and don't just follow the paradigm you're given, like really try and discover what is right for you. And so I agree that it's something that I still feel a little nervous about, that I don't want people to think that is right because it worked for me, because I don't think it works for most people.
Now, speaking of most people generally, I'm going to be so professional and ask this question, like just generally speaking. You said that when you were Mormon, you were having a sexual relationship with your husband and had snuffed out a lot of those, gay feelings from the time you were 12 years old. Do people in mixed orientation marriages who are not even Mormon, who are in positions such as yours, still have sex with men? If you know what I'm asking.
Like if I still have sex with my husband?
I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yes,
I just don't want to be direct on everything.
No, you're good. I'm an open book.
So direct. I could never ask that question.
No, yeah, absolutely. I feel like I don't really know what the future will hold. We have talked about so many possibilities, my husband and I, and we see it as a possibility that we might not continue, like we might eventually land in a place where we don't have sex, or at least not sex very often. We might be in an open relationship and still love each other and still be married to each other, but it's very possible that won't always be a part of our marriage, but it still is at this point. I said to my therapist that my therapist kind of helped me understand that sex, I've kind of Pavloved myself into being able to have a good time, in heterosexual sex, being a homosexual, because of the church, honestly, like you weren't allowed to masturbate, right? So I only ever experienced those pleasurable moments when I had intimacy with my husband. It was like, intimacy with my husband, and then let's focus on Lauren's pleasure now, and so it was never something we were able to achieve like at the same time, but it is something that I only ever did when I had intimacy. And because I had such a strong emotional and romantic relationship with my husband, I was able, I'm in a place where I'm able to say, like, yeah, I absolutely will continue to have intimate relations with my husband. They continue to typically not be, like I said before, not be sexual experiences. They're much more emotional experiences for me. It's much more about the connection and the feeling loved and the feeling wanted for me. But yeah, it's something that for our marriage, that's how it works. And it is working pretty well at this point. But we're open to what the future might hold. We're open to things changing because we don't pretend to know what the future will hold, and we don't pretend to know what will work for us in 5 years. We just know that we're great at communicating, and we will continue to communicate our needs and kind of figure things out as we go.
That's so interesting. And again, thank you for being like open and vulnerable enough to share that. And I'm just kind of thinking of a lot of the sexual repression that a lot of Mormon women go and post-Mormon women go that through deconstruction. And I'm just thinking that somebody probably just heard that thinking like, yeah, sure, I have a sex life with my husband and we orgasm or whatever, but they don't have that degree of emotional intimacy that you describe. So it's like you can have one, but you don't always have the other. Yeah. And like there is a striving that I think most married Mormon women, ex-Mormon women, whoever, like everyone's striving to have a strong connection with their partner, their spouse, in whatever orientation, quite honestly. Right. So I think that's a really key, interesting part of your story that I'm actually surprised by. Of like that's a really interesting dynamic that I hadn't quite been able to dig into before. So that you're able to articulate that, and that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I love about our marriage. That we strive really hard to just meet each other's needs, and we're willing to sacrifice to do that, and never at the expense of either one of our like emotional well-being. But I feel so lucky to have such an amazing husband, and it's not luck. I mean, we put the work in. We really, really did put the work in to have such a strong marriage. But yeah, we're lucky that it works for us, because I know that's just not the case for a lot of people. And I just feel really lucky that I can enjoy having sex with my husband, even if it's not the way I imagined sex would be. It's not like the super sexual experience for me, but it's still a positive experience. And like you said, yeah, a lot of straight people don't have that connection. A lot of people, for them, it's only the physical, and it's so amazing to have that emotional connection, and that, yeah, it's very special. Our relationship is so awesome and perfect and amazing, and I could just talk about praises to my husband for hours. So
I love that you said that you corrected yourself and you're like, it's not luck, it's that we put the work in. And I hope that's what people are hearing, that like, you've been through some outrageously hard things through your disability and your sexual orientation, and that it's taken a lot of work, and that you've had a partner who's been patient as you're patient with him. And that's an incredible example. And as well for your daughter. And I guess as we're wrapping up, the final question that I have, John, I don't know what other final questions that you have, is you mentioned that giving birth to your daughter was so major in motivating you to really figure out your belief in the church and in God. And then I'm sure that has other implications with figuring out your identity and being true to yourself. So what is your message for, I don't know if you're planning on having more children, but for your daughter who might listen to this one day, what do you hope that she takes away from your journey?
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm not planning on having more children, but you never know. But that's a really good question. I mean, I guess the obvious things of like, do your research and don't believe something just because someone tells you it's true, and, informed consent and loving people the way they are. And yeah, ultimately, I just hope that she, my biggest desire in life is that she can be happy. And so I hope that she learns how important advocating for herself is, and how important it is to do things for yourself, and to do the things necessary to deal with any trauma you might face, right? I've gone through a lot of trauma in my life, and a lot of people let that trauma rule them and control them. And I probably did for a little bit. I definitely wallowed in self-pity plenty of times in my life, but I also went to therapy and dealt with it, and, got on medication when I needed to. And I advocated for myself, and that's something I hope my daughter can do, is to stand up for herself. But also a huge thing that we haven't really touched on that much is advocating for other people. That, I feel like it would be immoral of me to have the knowledge I have about the harm and the abuse of the church and not say anything. Like, that would be immoral, because not only are people suffering, but people are dying. The suicide rate in Utah is well above the national average. You know, it's the number one cause of death for teenagers is death by suicide. And if people think that that has nothing to do with the church, then they need to talk to more gay people, because that's absolutely, you know, the reason why there are so many people who feel that their only option is to end their life. And so I hope that she can be strong enough to defend other people and to stand up for other people, because that has been a huge part of my deconstruction, is the empathy that I was able to develop for others, and realizing that it's not okay to abuse anyone ever, you know, like there's no accepting abuse because of the end goal. I just hope that she can advocate for herself and advocate for other people, because those are the two things that I think will facilitate the most happiness in her life.
Beautiful, yeah.
And you've been working hard to be a bit of an activist here in Utah. Do you want to talk about that, or not so much?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess I don't know where to start. So I heard about a few months ago Natasha Helfer's situation when she was called to a disciplinary council, and I really resonated with her message. You know, she was very vocal about ending shame culture, especially like sexual shame, and supporting LGBTQ plus members, and those things had affected me so deeply in my life. I had, you know, at that point, I had attributed my negative sexual experiences to shame culture and the shame and sexuality. At that point, I hadn't quite realized I was gay, but I was very moved by her message, that she advocated for things I wanted to advocate for, that she advocated for, you know, the LGBTQ plus community. And I, you know, saw myself as a fierce ally, and my brother had been excommunicated himself for being gay. And so I watched the live stream of her excommunication. I mean, it wasn't inside, but, you know, and was just devastated at their treatment of her, and devastated that they went through with the excommunication. And so I organized a protest. I didn't even live in Utah, but I flew to Utah, and I organized that protest outside of church headquarters. And it, to me, almost felt like reconciliation or repentance, that I had not been there for my brother, that he was excommunicated. And although it was heartbreaking, I thought the church had made the right decision. You know, ultimately he had broken his covenants, and I thought that the church was correct to relieve him of them so that he wouldn't be accountable. And looking back on that, I'm horrified that I thought that. But yeah, I very much felt the need to make up for that, and I at that point had realized how abusive excommunication is, that they can hold your salvation over your head and punish you and punish your loved ones. And I just was like, no, I'm not going to take this sitting down like I did with my brother. I'm going to go and support this amazing woman who had become like a hero of mine in just a few days, as I read her story and saw some of the work she had done. And I so desperately wanted to show her love and support, but I also wanted to let the church know that what they were doing was wrong. And even if they didn't even read my petition, you know, I still felt like I had the moral obligation to do something. And so having that experience, which was overall a very positive experience, a lot of people showed up. So many people were so loving and so kind. Natasha showed up herself, and I was just so grateful that she was able to be there and see how many people were there to support her. And I realized then how big of an impact activism can have. not necessarily on making big changes in the church, but hopefully eventually, yes, but in healing people who were harmed. And so that's why I got to Utah, and right after Elder Holland's talk on Monday, that was very inflammatory and very hurtful to the gay community, or all of the LGBTQ plus community. And I organized the chalk event at BYU because I didn't want more people to die. I didn't want more people in my community to die. And I knew that his words could have that effect. And I know how lonely it is. And I didn't want them to feel like they were alone. And so that one wasn't a protest. I wasn't protesting Elder Holland's words. I wasn't saying anything about Elder Holland. We went and we only wrote messages of love and support. We, drew rainbows and quoted nice scriptures and, were able to just spread the entire sidewalk south of campus with messages of just love and support to the LGBTQ plus community.
And you helped organize that.
Yeah. And so many people reached out, or I saw messages of other people who said they saw those messages and felt like they weren't alone, and felt like they could keep going, and felt like somebody cared about them, and just reminded me, like, yeah, that's what I have to do now. Like I know so much about the church. I understand its harm, and it does no good for me to try and to fight the church, because they're always going to win. They have better lawyers and more money than you could ever imagine. But I can try and spread love and to stand up for what I believe is right. And so that's something that's become very important to me. And BYU erased the chalk, and we went again the next day, and then they erased it again, and we went again on Sunday. And so I'm just been very proud of the post-Mormon community that, we are so determined to spread love and to spread understanding, even though the church would like to paint us in a very negative light. The church loves to paint ex-Mormons as hateful, angry, offended people, but the reality is maybe some people are, but most of us just want the people we love to be safe, and we want the people in the church to be safe. And so often those things are the same thing. The people I love are in the church, and I want them to not be hurt and to not suffer unnecessarily.
There's a video that came out a day or two ago with the BYU student sort of dumping water on one of the chalk drawings and maybe saying some homophobic things.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to say about how you felt, or what you thought about that video?
Yeah, when I had organized the event, I was very nervous. I assumed we were going to get lots of pushback. I'd assumed we were going to get the police called on us and all of those things. But, we had cleared it with the police. We were not doing it. We were following all the rules, basically. And so I knew it was going to be okay, but I was very nervous. But that wasn't the experience I had at the event itself. So many students came up to us, asked us what we were doing, and said, "That's amazing. Can we join?" And I bought a bunch of extra chalk, so I would just give them chalk, and they would start writing love messages to people as well. And so because I had received such a positive experience at the event, I was really shocked to see that video and to see that, that hope in humanity that had been restored was kind of like dashed again. And that's why I was like, yeah, let's go again. Let's do it again, because love is more powerful than hate, and it's easier for them to destroy. It takes a lot less time for them to clean up the sidewalk than it did for us to do it, but ultimately, love wins, and I was willing to keep going back, and honestly, as disheartening as it was to hear that homophobic slur and that hate come from that man, what was more hurtful, surprisingly, was that BYU cleaned it up. It wasn't on their property. We had approved it from the Provo police, and they sent BYU grounds, so BYU employees, to clean up what wasn't on their property. And they didn't just do it once; they did it twice. They did it Friday morning, and then they called in their grounds at 3 a.m. in the morning on Sunday. So not only were they working on a Sabbath, so they were being hypocritical, but they did it in a time where they wouldn't be seen, because they were seen on Friday, and that caused backlash. So they called their students, the people who work grounds are students. They called them in at 3 in the morning, the Sunday before school starts, to clean up messages of love, like, that weren't even on their property. Like, it was so disappointing to feel like, I thought we were doing something so amazing. And we did do something so amazing. So many people felt love when they needed to. And then that's how BYU responded. In cowardice is what I would call it, that they did it in the dark of night when no one would see them do it. And they wanted to erase the love that we had put down. And I just can't see why that would be necessary. I can't see why they would feel the need to erase messages of love that weren't even on their property. Just despicable, in my opinion.
But you're not giving up.
Nope, we're not giving up. I'm heading to BYU right after this, actually.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Lauren Rogers, this has been just such a delightful... Isn't she lovely?
Isn't
Carah?
she lovely? Yeah.
No, you are delightful and wise and poised and kind.
It's trauma. Trauma made me wise.
Oh, well, that doesn't make me happy, but I'm happy I'm happy. Thanks for doing your, My Mormon Story TikTok so that I could learn about you. Thanks for your TikTok channel. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us today. And thanks for your activism to try and pay it forward and spread the love. And it was fun to meet your husband and your child. It's just been a delightful day.
Yes,
and
for me too.
I hope we can hang out and see each other again and have a cheeseburger again.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so thankful that I was able to come here. I was really nervous because I hadn't, come out publicly as having left the church, but
that's going to change.
Yeah, there's something very therapeutic about being able to share my story. And so thank you so much for having me and giving me a platform where I could have a voice, because that's something that the church loves to suppress, female voices. So it's awesome to have the ability to have my voice be heard. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and what a beautiful, it's not like a typical lesbian story per se, although that doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we've had several women who identify as lesbian reach out to us and express interest in coming on Mormon Stories. This won't be the last, right, Carah?
Oh, I have a DMs full. It's not fun. Darn it. If I was gay, that'd be much more fun. But I have DMs full of women who want to talk to me, but only for producing Mormon Stories. But yeah, we'll definitely have a lot more now that I'm here. Now that the female voice is here on Mormon Stories, you can't get rid of me, John. We're going to fill this chair with lesbians every day of the week. Just kidding.
Yeah, more to come.
Love it.
But what a beautiful, I expressed public, I don't know if shame's the right word, but I lamented that I'm 100 episodes into Mormon Stories. And this, I had not yet interviewed someone who identifies as lesbian for some weird reason. But what a great first one, and we're going to do more. Yeah. What's that?
I told you it's because I wasn't here.
Yeah, it's all about Carah. At the end of the day, it's all about Carah. It's always
I did. I made a TikTok. That was what's really funny. Let's tell the audience. I made a TikTok that I was trying to find. We left a meeting and I was like, I gotta reach out. I got to find like a really good, like another good lesbian story. And I didn't realize yet that we had already booked you to come on this Monday and that you identify as a lesbian. Had no idea. And then she messages me and she's like, well, you're interviewing me on Monday and I am one. And I was like, I am so good at my job. I just manifested. I put it out there and it's just right here in front of me. But we'll see if anyone can beat this interview. I don't think they can. So.
Well, yeah. Well, it's been lovely, Lauren. Thank you so much. And Carah, thanks so much for being co-host and producer, and for all the ways you make you improve the quality of what we put out through Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation, and
I hope so.
occasionally make things more enjoyable and fun.
Occasionally you add something. Yeah. I think it's just a fun job, and I'm happy to meet so many amazing people and hear so many amazing stories. And Lauren, you articulated so many important things today. Just like, even if we only talked about mission stuff, that would have been enough. This was like 2 entire important interviews in one, I felt like. So, and 3 talking about like the Holland and the chalk thing at the end there too. So you articulated so many good things today. So yeah, thank you for your vulnerability and driving out here and doing all the advocacy work that you've been doing, and really just bringing Lori Beth, is that her name?
Yeah.
Lori Beth, to come walk around, be like a cute little presence in the room. Yeah. So it's been a really fun day. So thanks for telling your story.
Thank you. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity.
And in our interview yesterday with Matt Easton, we listed a bunch of resources for LGBT Mormons, youth, adults, including BYUQ, Color of the Campus, Encircle, Affirmation. We'll try and list a bunch of links and resources. The Trevor Project, National Suicide Hotline. There are all sorts of great resources that you should check out that we'll maybe try and include on our show notes for those who are in need of support.
Right on. And just tell everyone your TikTok handle again, and anything else you want to share about if people want to follow you or reach out to you. What do they need to do?
Yeah, my TikTok name is exmomom, so it's exmo_mom_. And yeah, I try to answer all my comments and DMs, so any questions or anything, any other activism ideas that I can do, I'm always looking for an opportunity to show love to the community. So yeah.
Do you have an Instagram, or is it just a private one? We shouldn't be giving it out.
I technically have one, but I don't use it. So
okay.
Not
so
helpful.
TikTok would be the best place for people to find you.
Yep.
Okay.
And if you want to increase your chances of being selected to be interviewed on Mormon Stories podcast, but more importantly, if you want to share your story, please download TikTok or use your TikTok account. Create a video telling your Mormon story in between 1 and 3 minutes. It can be negative, positive, or both. And tag it, hashtag MyMormonStory. And Carah and I, it's got 1.2 million views, that hashtag now. And Carah and I will monitor that. And we're going to be selecting others of you to come on Mormon Stories and tell your story. But more importantly, whether or not we bring you on, you will have shared your story. And once you get in the millions of views on any hashtag or any video, you're reaching a lot of people. So we hope that hashtag lives long and prospers. We'd love to see it get to 2 million and 3 million and 4 million, because Mormon Stories, as great as it's doing, we don't have a single hashtag on Mormon Stories on YouTube that's reaching that many people. So TikTok is a powerful thing. Please use it. Please check it out. Learn it. If you really want to make a difference, that's one great way to do it. We'll go ahead and wrap up and just say thanks for all your support. Thanks to all the donors that make Mormon Stories podcast possible. Your donations pay for me, pay for Carah, pay for Gerardo, pay for Brooklyn, pay for Jennifer, and all the different support that we have to make all this content possible. The lighting, the cameras, the sound, the hosting, the rent of this facility, marketing, just all that stuff, your donations pay for. So thank you. If you're one of the, 999 out of 1,000 that listen to or watch Mormon Stories podcast and you don't donate, we're losing donors every month because people lose money, lose their jobs, lose interest, and or they get mad because we covered one topic or another, or didn't cover one topic or another. We would love to invite some of you to become a monthly donor now, today, because we always need new support to replace support that ends. So please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you can afford. Your donations are tax deductible in the U.S. They go 100% towards the mission of the Open Stories Foundation of Mormon Stories. And we'll just help as many people as we can for as long as you will support us. And that's how it works. A ton of you stepped up to support the John Larson campaign. So we raised over $10,000 already in just a few days to support John Larson becoming a regular contributor to Mormon Stories podcast and us hosting the Mormon Expression podcast so that people can consume that and enjoy it. So If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to MormonExpression.com or MormonStories.org/MormonExpression, and you can become a donor and supporter to John Larson, the Mormon Expression Project, or you can just donate to Mormon Stories generally. There are other ways you can support us: subscribing to us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, any of the socials. We're pretty much on it. Subscribe to us there. You can like our content, you can comment there, and you can just share these wonderful episodes. If you know anyone that could benefit from today's interview with Lauren Rogers, or yesterday's interview with Matt Easton, or any of the interviews in our library, just share it. Share it on your social media. Share it on Instagram, on Facebook. Make shorts of these videos. Share it on TikTok. We love that. And just share the links with friends and family. That's a great way to get the word out through word of mouth. So that's enough for today. We've got many more exciting Mormon Stories episodes in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. But we always treasure you, our listeners and our viewers. We consider this a sacred honor. Carah, over and out. Roger.
Roger that.
Roger,
comma, Lauren, that.
And Lauren, drive safely. Stay in touch. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.